and just want to give you a chance to introduce yourself, and thank you again for joining me about this topic of bullying.
Yeah, so my name is Melissa. I'm a reading teacher at Columbus Public. I work with various grades depending on what grade needs the most help in reading. And I've been working in the school district for about 5 years now, and I'm happy to join you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Well, this topic we'll be talking about today has to do with bullying and bullying in the schools. And first of all, just wanted to read some definitions about what in the counseling literature what they talk about and define as bullying, and then maybe hear some of what you've seen amongst the kids. I know you've taught for several years right now, from preschool on up, to the elementary level, what kind of things you've seen. So some of the factors that they talked about is to define something as bullying, it's decided and purposeful, it's intentional, negative activity, there's aggressive behavior involved, whether verbal or behavioral. The person intends to inflict or attempt to inflict harm. There's a power imbalance between the bully and the victim, and that it's repetitious. It's not like a one-time just fussing with the person. The victim feels helpless, anxious, or depressed, and it could be either verbal, indirect, or direct towards the victim. So how have you seen bullying in the schools, and what you've seen? I know you've mainly worked with younger kids, in preschool and elementary age.
Right. I think the most common form of bullying that I've been in contact with is probably bullying that is more the bullier intends to inflict, some kind of pain or emotion from the student that they're bullying. I've seen it occur more in older grades. Now, when I first started teaching, it occurred a lot more, but the school that I teach at, it's really cracked down on bullying. We have a great support system and a great counselor, and that's really helped with that. But I would say the form that is even more common these days is the cyber.
Oh, sure.
The cyberbullying and Facebook, and you have more of the social media that kids can bully, and they don't necessarily have to do it face to face. So I think that gives even bulliers, more of a chance to do it, where they don't have to be so confrontational. And that's really where I've seen it occur the most, is that cyber. Now, as far as bullying goes in my school, we have a very strict, no bullying policy. So if a student does bully right away, they're done. We have a system we go through, and there's consequences. But I would say that cyberbullying is the most common form I've seen recently.
Yeah, and it sounds like bullying maybe isn't as big of an issue in your school because they have a policy.
Absolutely.
Which I know we'll get into later, it's just some of the different techniques, some of the different approaches people use. And I was interested in hearing, eventually about from you kind of which things seem to work or don't work, because I know in different settings there may be different ones that work. But in terms of bullying, there's some things the literature talks about why do people even bully. And I didn't know, which of these that you've noticed or maybe not noticed. Some people think that it's a reaction to deviance in terms of deviance from the norm. Like if there's someone who looks different, they're shorter, taller, fatter, skinnier, or from a different nationality or something, that person tends to be bullied. Some people, it's more the bully wants to be in a position of power or authority or feel like they're in charge. Some have their own issue, like ADD or impulsivity. Maybe there's a family problem. Some do it for revenge. Maybe the victim and the bully have both been victims and bullies themselves, and some look at it as more of just a game to tease and play around and mess with someone. Have you noticed any of those?
I would say the diverse factor isn't as relevant in our school. We have such a big diversity that I don't think it's really highlighted on. But I would say the most common is probably that power you had mentioned, of a student or somebody wanting to have that power over somebody else. I've also seen, actually, in some cases, parents will actually want to do something or play a part in the cyberbully. So it's very interesting where it's not just students anymore.
Wow.
It's where you have parents that want to get involved with these, like, the cyberbullying and he said, she said type thing. So I would say the majority is the power you had mentioned. Maybe they had been victimized themselves. Maybe there's a cycle going on. I can definitely see that because sometimes talking to parents, you could see that just there's a cycle of bullying and that is definitely relevant. But I would say the power probably is the most common that I've witnessed.
And one of the things I hear you alluding to is also in the literature about just the multi-generational aspect in some of the cases with the bullies. So it sounds like in some of the examples you've seen that it's almost like the parents model bullying, or they model lack of social skills, or they model,
or
whoever
like
speaks.
they would even bully maybe a teacher into their point is right. And that's where, and I'm sure you'll get more into later, but that's where a strong supporter or a principal is key. You have to have somebody on your side because these parents even try and bully us into that their child's always right and that, it couldn't happen, this couldn't happen, or giving excuses. So I see it's definitely a pattern. Definitely a model. I could see a learned behavior.
Now there's several different roles that I talk about in terms of the cast of bullying. Things from the bully, which we started talking about, to the victim. Then there's another group called bully victims that are kind of both that we talked about. The assistant to the bully, the rescuer, and the bystander. So let's switch from the bully to the victim a little bit. So some of the things they say about the victim is this is someone who usually reacts to situations with more hyperarousal or fear. So the bully gets to see their reaction. They have, because they react so much, an increased vulnerability to more attacks by the bullies. But then there's another part of them where their emotions are really restricted and held inside, and they're not real good at communicating how it affects them when they're bullied. That they also have a tendency to perceive things more as threat and become more defensive about it than things that maybe someone else will let just roll off their shoulder, ignore, something like that. And they have this wishful thinking sometimes, like, well, maybe someday the bully will just kind of vanish and magically go away. But ultimately they reward the attacker or the bully with visible distress. So any of those that you've seen, or when you talk about the victims, whether it's in person or cyberbullying, what have you noticed in terms of the victims?
Honestly, when I was growing up, it was more that the victims, had those descriptions of what you described. But now it's almost like, I think students, at least in my perspective, are taking more of a role, assertive role in telling people and doing something about it, as opposed to just, letting it happen. So I haven't really seen where victims, are afraid or won't talk or say anything. I've seen the opposite in our school, but I'm sure every situation is different. When I was growing up, I remember it was more like, the victim was like withdrawn, quiet, won't stand up for themselves. But it's almost like it's the opposite, where the victim will say something, and then even in some cases, then they become, they reverse roles, or they become more of a bully, and then you have this whole cycle thing of, well, they're not exactly innocent.
Right.
So that's just one difference I've noticed between students now and when I was growing up.
And it also sounds like it's different because again, it sounds like I heard you say that the principal at your school is very supportive.
Absolutely.
Really looks like it's a more of a systems approach where like the principal role model support for the teachers. The teachers know they have the backing. They know that they can set assertiveness to the parents and role model too. So that always helps when you know you have that backing. So, yeah, and again, you also highlighted that the people who are the victims, mostly in your school, that they have been taught to some degree how to be assertive.
Yes.
And I know some school systems, some of
No,
the kids haven't been taught that or role
right.
modeled that. So again, it's kind of what was role modeled to them. So we have the bully and the victim. Then, in terms of the cast, we also have the bully victims, which you alluded to also, that more and more students nowadays are finding out are both a bully and a victim. That whether it be with each other in the school or even in the home, maybe they're stressed out and there's something going on in the family environment that they don't know how they're going to handle, or a stress or something, to where they take it out, on someone else in the class.
Absolutely.
So you've seen more of that where
and
they've been
I've seen,
both.
some of these kids come from really hard backgrounds, and they'll talk to me or they'll talk to other teachers about things going on at home where, there's a lot of stuff going on, and it kind of reflects in the classroom how they act or maybe how they treat others. A lot of times, if a student comes to our school and they've been in a different setting and they've been used to how they're being treated at home, we have to almost model and teach them the correct behavior because they have never been shown how to act. So it's very interesting. But yeah, I've seen students that have had issues at home and that respond to other students with what's going on in their life.
Sure.
So
Yeah. And again, the social skills part, I think you're already hitting on one of the techniques that's really highlighted in the literature, that whether they get it at home or whether you can do what you can do as a teacher or principal, just teaching the social skills, that it's not necessarily automatic. I know there's some parents that come into counseling that'll say to me, well, they'll learn it eventually, when they're in their 20s, they'll figure it out. And it's like, it's not automatic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see a lot of, in our middle school grades, and I think you'll have this everywhere, but more of like the girl drama.
Oh, yeah.
As opposed to like truly bullying. It's more of like, well, I'm not your friend this day because of this. And when you're a middle schooler, everything's such a big deal.
Oh, yeah.
So I've seen that, and I know that our counselor has had to address that. But I've seen that more than the bullying situations. I've seen more of like the girl drama.
Yeah, and that's interesting. I'm glad you brought that up, is that they did mention that in the literature about the girls, especially middle school, junior high, where it's that game playing, manipulation, and more of the indirect aggression, like, I won't talk to you, but I'll talk to her, and we won't be friends or something. And so it's like, well, how does the person who's the victim of that respond? That's really tricky.
And one thing that our counselor does to address that is she has a program, or she does a program called Rocks.
Oh, okay.
And it's a girl empowering program. And they meet, I think, once or twice a week. I think it might just be 6th grade, but then they talk about everything, and they build on their strengths, so that's really helped them have that, because that's a tough age.